Good afternoon, everybody, or morning, whatever time of day it is where you are at. I am Dr. Christine Schertz, and this is our video for Module 2. It is a beautiful day in Florida. I'm recording this on Martin Luther King Day, so technically I'm off, but you know what that means for teachers. We're still working, right? So I finally get to wear a sweater, and I had my fireplace on because it's actually a little cold. Not for you Northerners. I was a Northerner once, and it would not be cold to you, but for Florida, we all think it's freezing because it was in the 30s. So wherever you're at, we pray you have a blessed day. I did want to mention we have 2 students in Uganda, not just one. So we want to pray for both of our students in Uganda. We want to pray. I just am so happy that we have students from all over the world and all different perspectives and backgrounds. And I'm just happy that we're going to be able to have these great conversations. So happy about that. So let's start with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time, this week where we're learning. Lord, I believe that teaching is an act of worship. Lord, when we teach, we are worshiping you. So Lord, help us today to understand this material. Help us to apply it. Help us, Lord, to make a difference in the lives of the adults and the children that we come in contact with. We love you, Lord. Amen. Okay, let's get with it. So today, this is EDUC advanced theories of reading, and we're going to be talking today about theories of literacy and application. Now, some of you may say, theories, I don't want to learn the theories. I just want to get to the application part. But we're going to talk about it's really important that you know the theory behind what you're doing. So what I want you to be able to do this week is, first of all, summarize at least one theory related to literacy instruction, something that you're interested in. We're going to discuss theories of literacy. You will be writing a theoretical framework for literacy instruction. Don't worry, it's not going to be too bad. It's going to be 2 to 3 pages in length with a title page and then with a reference page. So with the title and reference, it'll be about 5 pages. And then in Module 3, you will apply a theoretical framework to conduct scientifically based literacy instruction. So you'll apply that theoretical framework to teaching a literacy lesson. So I want to show you this illustration. In one of the articles that you're going to be reading, it is a systematic review of 94 intervention articles. And what that revealed is that many of those articles, as a matter of fact, most did not include a theoretical framework. And sometimes we skip over that theoretical framework. We're like, it's kind of the boring stuff. I don't need to know that. But the theoretical framework is very important because the theoretical framework tells us the why. The theory many times is invisible. It's what teachers cannot effectively match the what to the student needs. And so sometimes you say, this just doesn't seem like it works. That's because many times the theory doesn't match the what. The why and the what don't match. Guys, as Christian educators, the theory is extremely important. And we're going to get into that, why this theory really does matter. So I have a video here, and I used a tool called Google LM Notebook, and I put in about 7 different articles, a lot of the ones we read, and had this created. So I want to watch this with you, and I may stop theory a little bit of times to talk about it because this really gets into the science of reading. And many of you last week in Module 1, we read about the science of reading, but many of you still had some questions. So I'm going to show this, and so here we go.
Let's jump right in. We're tackling a massive question today. How do we actually teach children to read? You know, it sounds like it should be simple, but it's one of the most complicated and fiercely debated topics in all of education. Let's dig into why. I want you to just look at this number for a second. 60%. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, more than half of 4th graders in the U.S. aren't proficient readers. Now, that's not just a statistic, right?
Okay, I'm going to stop right there because I don't know why when this was created, why they didn't make that visual 50%. Because, and if you look at NAEP scores, the National Report Card, it's worse in the United States. We're at probably about 35% proficiency rates. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back and watch a little bit more of this.
Let's jump right in. We're tackling a massive question today. How do we actually teach children to read? It sounds like it should be simple, but it's one of the most complicated and fiercely debated topics in all of education. Let's dig into why. I want you to just look at this number for a second. 60%. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, more than half of fourth graders in the US aren't proficient readers. Now, that's not just a statistic, right? That is a huge flashing red light on the dashboard of our entire education system. And that really brings us to the core of what we're talking about today. I mean, with literally mountains of research spanning generations, how is it possible that so many kids are still falling behind? Why is there such a massive gap between what the science tells us should work and what's actually happening in our schools? Yeah, this is not a new problem. For decades, educators have been on this quest for the right way to teach reading, a debate that's so intense it's actually been called the reading wars. And while the adults argue, millions of students have been caught in the middle. So to really understand where we are now, we have to go back and look at how we got here. I want you to think of all the different theories of reading like different tools in a toolbox. Each one was designed to help build a reader, and each one has given us a really valuable but ultimately incomplete piece of the puzzle. And this is a great way to visualize that journey. We've been looking at the really complex act of reading through all these different lenses. Each theory gives us a different part of the puzzle. The thing is, none of them are totally wrong, but not one of them gives us the whole picture either. Okay, so first up, you have the linguistic approach. This is all about the nuts and bolts, the pure mechanics of it. It focuses on decoding skills, things like phonics and spelling. Basically, teaching a child how to translate the symbols on a page into sound.
Okay, I'm going to stop here because I'm going to go over this in more detail. But what we're saying is the theory is the tools behind it. One major theory is a linguistic theory. So in this module, you are going to be writing that paper, again, not very long, 2-3 pages, on one theory, and then you will be applying that theory to teach a lesson in module 3. One theory is the linguistic theory of learning. And so now they're explaining that part.
It's absolutely essential, but sometimes it can put fluency ahead of actual comprehension. So in response to that, the focus kind of shifted to the reader's mind with psycholinguistic theory. This view says, hey, reading isn't just decoding. It's about making meaning. What a child already knows, their own personal experiences, their background knowledge, that's the key they use to unlock what the text is trying to say. Then the cognitive approach builds on that, looking at reading as a form of
Now I'm going to stop there for a minute. So we're kind of going through this timeline of where we are in the theories. And this the theory that we just did, the what was it? Now I forget the name, what they named it. Psycholinguistic, I think. That theory really talked more about background knowledge of the learner. And the problem is, this is when we did whole language movement, is that we just left off the decoding, okay? So sometimes in education, we'll have these theories and we just go all in and we don't use what is correct about the specific theory. So let's do cognitive theory now.
Active problem solving. This is all about filling up the reader's mental toolkit with specific strategies. Teaching them how to summarize what they just read or predict what's going to happen next so they can actively dig for meaning themselves. But of course, no reader is an island, right? Sociolinguistic theory widens the lens even more, showing us that reading is a social act. We learn and make sense of what we read within our communities, our classrooms, our families, our culture. And this brings us to the final tool in that toolbox, and it asks a really powerful question. Critical theory argues that texts are never neutral. It teaches students not just to understand a text, but to question it, to ask, whose voice am I hearing here? And maybe even more importantly, whose voice is missing? Okay, so we have all these powerful tools, all these different ways of looking at reading. But what if the problem isn't just about the tools we're using? What if we haven't been paying enough attention to the builder, the child's own learning brain? And this right here illustrates a major shift in the science of reading. Instead of focusing only on the what of reading, the text, the strategy.
Sorry, when it was saying that I needed more people in my meeting. And I am really struggling today with getting my mouse to move. I have 3 screens, so sometimes it's hard. Here we go.
Strategies, the context. The new focus is on the how of learning. We're now looking directly at the cognitive processes that are actually happening inside a child's brain. Now, this is so crucial. We are not throwing out that old toolbox. Instead, a new approach called the cognitive element model gives us a whole new blueprint. It takes the best parts of everything we've learned and integrates them, combining skills-based instruction like phonics with direct support for the cognitive processes a child needs to succeed, like their working memory. So what does that actually mean in a classroom? Well, this quote really gets to the heart of it. Instead of having kids play some abstract brain game to train their working memory and just hoping it helps with their reading, this model says we can actually train that memory as part of the reading lesson itself. It becomes a skill you build while you're learning to read. So, how does this actually work? Well, the cognitive element model has a pretty clear blueprint. It focuses on 4 key elements that all work together to strengthen the reader's brain from the inside out. First, it's about improving verbal efficiency, making the brain faster at processing and storing what it hears. Second, building up that long-term memory, like a rich library the brain can pull from. Third, training the central executive, which is basically like the brain's air traffic control system, managing all the information. And finally, teaching specific strategies that link working memory directly to the act of reading. Let's break that down a bit more. When we build fluency, we make decoding words automatic. That frees up a ton of mental bandwidth for the real work, which is comprehension. By building knowledge, like a bigger vocabulary, we give working memory less stuff to juggle because the words are already familiar. Then we can train that air traffic controller, the central executive, to manage the flow of information better. And finally, we give students a toolkit of strategies to consciously connect what they're reading to what they already know. So why is this such a big deal? Well, because for the students who are struggling the most, just giving them more of the same instruction simply isn't working. This model suggests a shift from just more practice to smarter practice. Here's the difference in a nutshell. The traditional approach, well, it often focuses on repetition, and it just assumes the child's brain is ready for the task. But the cognitive element approach embeds that cognitive training inside the reading practice. It actively works to strengthen the builder, the child's brain, so they can actually use the tools of reading way more effectively. When you boil it all down, this is the real takeaway. We need to stop seeing reading instruction as just teaching a subject. We have to start thinking about the cognitive architecture of the child who is doing the learning. Supporting how a child's brain works is every single bit as important as teaching them what to read. And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. For decades, the entire debate has been about the best way to teach the subject of reading. But to finally solve this crisis, maybe the real question we should be asking is this: should our primary focus be on teaching the subject or on teaching the child?
Okay, so that was a video that I created using Google LM Notebook, where I put in all of my work. And one thing about Google LM Notebook, it only uses what you put in. So I put in all of my research and all of my articles, and it created that. So, okay, so we're going to kind of go back as a review. I know you saw the video. So there is no single theory is enough. That's what the science of reading has said. We can't just rely on the cognitive theory or the socio-linguistic theory. The science of reading says we have to have this interdisciplinary ecosystem. So we're going to use linguistics, of course. We're going to use psychological motivation. We're going to use cognitive processes, socio-cultural processes, and critical processes like power and ideology. All of that plays into how a student learns to read. So these are some theories that you could write about, but you don't have to do these. You could use, there's hundreds of reading theories. Linguistic theory is a major one that we've came from. And so this, of course, talks about phonics and coding and sound symbol correspondence. So some of you are like, that sounds like the science of reading. Yeah, the science of reading has a lot of linguistic approach to it. The cognitive theory, the video talked a lot about that. That has to do with schema, the information a child's bringing in. How does a student construct and integrate knowledge? This, again, that cognitive element theory. And again, the science of reading includes the cognitive theory also. We have the sociocultural theory. This has a lot to do with, if you remember from your undergrad days, Lev Vygotsky talked about the zone of proximal development. I'm a Hoosier. We're going to play our championship in football, but we're really known for basketball. And in basketball, when you play, You have that sweet spot. You have that spot that you can just hit every single shot. We want that zone of proximal development, not too hard, not too easy. That zone where the teacher is with what we call the more knowledgeable other. And that zone keeps on moving. Critical theory. This examines things like power, bias, ideology. Now, some of you may say, sounds like critical race theory. It does. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. In politics, theory aligns with politics, which aligns with what we teach. And so I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. So for some kids in your reading, what you're going to talk about, last week we talked about evidence-based, right? We want things to be evidence-based, but you're going to have some kids that evidence-based isn't enough. Despite the best practices with the science of reading, they're still not responding. And these kids are going to need that cognitive element model. They're going to need things like fluency practice, knowledge practice, looking at long-term memory. They need help with attention and updating, that central executive functioning, and then they need specific tools. So some of those things, they need help with efficiency. I like this diagram. Verbal knowledge supports working memory, and inefficient fluency, I should say, hogs up mental resources. What we want kids is to have automaticity. We want them to have automaticity isn't the go, comprehension is the goal. Sorry, sometimes my Southern accent comes out when I talk. Automaticity frees up the bandwidth for comprehension. Okay. Element 2, we want knowledge. We want kids to have deep background knowledge that allows kids to chunk information and reduce that cognitive overload. We need to teach kids executive control, attention systems. We need inhibits irrelevant information. So we have this control system. We need to teach kids to what is irrelevant, what is important. We can do that through mnemonic devices, through rehearsal strategies, through linking working memory to the text. What does that look like in practice? Well, just one example, doing a what if game. You are reading a story, you're going to ask the student to retell it, then retell it again with a changed ending. That cognitively forces the central executive system to update that mental model, right? A close recall. This is where you have a passage where some of the there are blanks for some of the words. So I actually also teach a diagnosis class of assessment for my undergrads, and they have to do this maze close. And this kind of strategy trains storage and processing at the same time. So many of you are getting your NILD certification and educational therapist master's degree. Not everybody, but NILD is actually one of the best examples of this cognitive element principles. They do things, NILD teaches about mediated verbal learning, cognitive stimulation, structured sequencing, explicit processing, and transfer. So NILD is a strong real-world application of this cognitive element framework. Now, it's not the only one. Public schools are using this also because it is a part of the science of reading. So another component we need to look at is motivation. Motivation. Some of you may want to look at motivation theory behind reading. So we have this psycholinguistic that has to do with engagement, drives the will to process, and then critical identity and representation in text. So what this is saying is many people believe that that engagement has to do with are students represented in text? Do they have the same background information and so forth? So motivation is important, but research often treats motivation as secondary. What the science of reading is showing us is that cognitive training is really demanding. When you teach reading, your kids should be exhausted at the end of that lesson because they've worked so hard. Without the fuel of engagement, the central executive will not stay engaged. So you have to do that engagement all the time. So what does that look like in the future? Well, the science of reading incorporates a lot of different theories. So the integrated future of literacy, we need to define the theory. We need to know our why. So when you look at a program, like I'm just going to use UFly because many of you know that, I use it a lot. What is the theory behind that? Well, we definitely see some linguistic theory behind it, right? And you can see some of the theories behind it. You need to know, does the theory match the instruction, the needs of the student? We need to bridge reading and writing. This is so important, and good programs will do that. Good programs and good teaching does reading and writing. It's a bi-directional skill. And lastly, we need to embed cognitive training. And I gave an example, NILD does this to support struggling students. Last thing, a couple of other things. This really relates to educational policy. States all over the United States is requiring schools to use reading programs that aligns with the science of reading. They're mandating that. They are providing defensible frameworks for curriculum adoption, saying, so if you adopt this curriculum, it has to have these factors, and they are linked to these theories. They're saying many schools and states are having laws that say they have to align to MTSS interventions. It has to emphasize systematic skill-based instruction. We need to reduce reliance on guessing and do context-based strategies. There are many laws that are saying you have to have transparency. Parents have the right to know what that curriculum is. So they're increasing legislative and public scrutiny. So the key takeaway, this framework not only aligns with cognitive and literacy research, but it directly responds to educational policy. And that's why it's important. That's why Christians need to know theory. When we know the theory, we can then understand the why. And sometimes the why is not a Christian worldview, right? So we need to understand that. Just a few laws I have up here. Mississippi has a law called Literacy-Based Promotion Act. Florida definitely has, trust me, Florida has a lot of mandates. Tennessee, Colorado initiated the READ Act revision. And in California, recently just did the requiring phonics and structured literacy teaching. Also, curriculum context. I want you to look at some of these curriculum laws as it relates, and I want you, or legislation, how it aligns with theory. So we have in California, they've done the ethnic studies model curriculum required. So they're requiring this ethnic studies. Illinois has a culturally responsive teaching. New Jersey, mandating African-American history curriculum. Not saying any of these are bad. I just want you to understand that the laws align with the theory. Oregon has laws about ethnic studies and culturally sustaining curriculum. Okay, so those are some of the laws. So I want you to think about this. What instructional shifts do the laws encourage? So many times we have these instructional shifts that are aligned with these laws. So legislation said you have to do this. What follows? Well, then you have the policy influences the type of curriculum you're going to use. It influences your materials. Right now with the science of reading, you have tons of materials that you have to have decodable text, right? You have to have a clear phonics instruction. So it aligns with that. Where do you see alignment with structured literacy? That's really happening a lot all over the United States. How could these policies impact teacher preparation? I can tell you they do, because I do teacher preparation, and all the undergrads at Southeastern have a reading endorsement. And so a couple years ago, myself and another colleague rewrote our entire undergrad program. We have every student at Southeastern takes 4 undergrad classes in reading so they can get that endorsement. And we had to show how they met every single ILO to align with that. And so it has impacted higher education and teacher training, as well it should. And what tensions might schools face when balancing mandates and local control? That's a problem also. Okay, so moving forward, for researchers, we need to stop hiding the theoretical framework. It should be explicitly stated. As you read these articles this week, what is the theoretical framework behind it? Don't just skip over it. For teachers, be reflective consumers. Recognize that struggling readers may have working memory deficits that require embedded strategies, not just phonics, okay? And move beyond the reading words. We need to have this holistic science of learning that respects linguistic, cognitive, and sociocultural dimensions equally. Everything is important when you think about the science of reading. Okay, what are you going to do this week? Here we go. You have some readings, you have a discussion post in your paper. What I'm going to do is I am going to show you that on my computer here, if I can get it to work. The problem is I am not coordinated enough to show you. There we go. Okay. Okay, let me try again. I think I have it up here. Sorry, guys, I really wish I was more coordinated with all my tabs I have open. Here at my house, I have like 3 computers. So here we go. Okay, so we're at module 2. And yes, I'm still there. Okay, there we are. Here's module 2. We have our objectives, which I already read to you. Under the Learn section, we have the following articles that you need to read. I'm so sorry, guys. I am really struggling getting my mouse to work. So here's some articles. You have 4 different articles to read. And then there's some videos that you can watch. These videos were selected because they apply specific literacy theories. So you can watch those if you want. The videos are not as important as the reading. You definitely need to do that reading. And then there are lots of supplemental materials you do not have to do, but you could if you wanted, if you were interested in one of these theories. It gives you information about that. Your discussion post for this week. Respond to the following, and you can do this. Explain, let me see. I think I asked for a video. Yeah, ask for a video. So how do theories, respond to all the following. How do theories support instructional practices? I want you in this video to identify and summarize the theory that you have chosen. Identify any theorist associated with that. And then explain your application of the theory in the lesson that you're going to do next week, okay? So I'm trying to remember for this. Okay. You can do the discussion post. I'm going to give you a choice. You can do a video or you can write it. Doesn't matter to me, either one. Then you have your paper that you're going to do. You're going to write a 2 to 3 page paper. This does not include your title page and your references. So it'll probably, with those, it'll be 5 to 6 pages. You need to take one theory and write about the theory. And let's look at the rubric for that. So we want to, a specific literacy need was identified. So what's the need? You're going to have a relevant theory. The theory is evaluated in relation to the literacy need. So in other words, the need and the theory need to align. Of course, you need to, there's a clear application of the theory to the literacy instruction. So what I'm trying to see is that you see this alignment. Here's a need, here's the theory, here are theorists that teach this theory, and here's justification for why that fits to the lesson that I'm going to be doing. And that's it. But I want you to think about Module 3 because you're going to be teaching a lesson, whether it's you're in ILD and you have a small group, you could do a whole class, but you need real kids, okay? And so begin thinking about that. That is all I have. I know this is a long video, but theoretical frameworks are a little bit tricky sometimes. So I wanted to spend some time going over this. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.